Hello everyone, welcome all to my channel. In this video, we are going to see about self-enquiry practices from the teachings of Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. This is the first part of this lecture series. In this part, we are going to discuss about basic introduction about self-enquiry and different terminologies used in self-enquiry. We are going to see detail about self, ego, etc. and what are the misconceptions about self-enquiry. If you have any suggestion regarding this video, let me know in the comment section below. And if you are new to this channel, press the subscribe button and bell icon near it so that you don't miss any video updates. Thank you. Let's get back to the topic. Self-enquiry basic introduction. One of the best methods suggested by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi for self-realization is self-enquiry. If we hear about the word self-enquiry for the first time, we may think that it is about inquiring into the self or inquiring about self. But we may have doubts such as how to do so, how is to inquire into the self, what does inquiry actually means. Self is not an object to be known by the seeker, but self is the very nature of the seeker who tries to know it. Self-enquiry does not mean inquire into an external object outside ourself. That's why Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi named the self-enquiry method as Who Am I method to direct seekers' attention to oneself and not to other objects. For whom is this inquiry necessary? Is it for self? No, since self is the ever-present, pure and blissful, so it will not do any inquiry, nor does it need to. It is only the ego that needs to do the inquiry. The ego is a false appearance, having no existence of its own. It is false I, which subsides and loses its form in sleep. So self became an object that could be known by the ego? No, the ego cannot know self. From the above statement, we can conclude that the self-enquiry is unnecessary for self and self-knowledge is impossible for the ego. Difference between who am I method and not I method. Ramana Maharshi version of self-enquiry is who am I method, which is different from other methods like not I method. Not I method advocates negating the five sheaths, namely the body, prana, mind, intellect and the darkness of ignorance. But who is to negate them, and how? How can the mind negate itself, its own form and others beyond its scope? In this method, mind can do nothing but repeating mentally, I am not this body, I am not this prana, etc. The self-enquiry is not a process of one thing inquiring about another thing. That's why the self-enquiry who am I taught by Bhagavan should be taken as self-attention, that is, attention merely to the feeling I. The nature of mind is going to things other than self. If the mind in this way goes to an external object, it means that it is clinging to that object. Attention itself is an attachment, since the mind is think about the body and prana, etc. and intentionally decide to negate them in not I method. Such attention is only a means of becoming attached to them, and it cannot be means of negate them. Mind and self. The self is our own reality. When the power of attention of the mind is directed more and more towards external objects, the attachment towards them will grow more and more and will never subside. Our thoughts are nothing but attention paid to external objects. The more we attend to the mind, the thought which are the form of the world, the more they will multiply and be nourished. This is indeed an obstacle. The more our attention to the external object, the more will be our attachment towards them. That's why it is impossible for the mind to negate anything by thinking I am not this, I am not this. On the other hand, if our attention is directed only towards ourselves, our knowledge of existence alone is nourished. If you are told to not to go to left hand side, then the practical way to do is to go to right side. Similarly, if you want to get rid of 5 sheets which are not self, the practical way to discard the non-self is focusing our attention on ourself. What is this I, or who am I? Thinking I am not this is a negative method, and this method is impractical. Ramana Maharshi has replaced this negative method by giving us the positive method, who am I? By attending to the feeling I, what is it or who is this I alone is renouncing the 5 sheets. According to Ramana Maharshi, the self-attention alone is the correct technique of eliminating the 5 sheets. Therefore, while practicing self-enquiry, instead of taking one of the 5 sheets as the object of our attention, we should fix our attention only to the I consciousness. Kriya and karma, doing and action. When the power of attention was dwelling upon an external object, it was called mind or the intellect, and its attention was called a doing or kriya, and the action is called karma. Only that which done by the mind is an action or karma. But as soon as the attention is fixed on the self, it loses its means names such as mind, intellect, or ego, sense, etc. That attention is no longer an action but became an inaction or akarma, or the state of being still. The mind which focuses on self is no more the mind. It became the conscious aspect of self. If the mind focuses on the external object, it is not the conscious aspect of self. It became a reflected form of consciousness. Hence, the self-attention is not a doing kriya, and it is also not an action karma. Self alone realizes the self, ego does not. Happiness and self. The mind which has obtained a burning desire for self-attention is said to be the fully matured one. Since it is not shifted its attention towards external objects, we can say that mind has finally reached the state of no desire. At this state, the mind has realized the consciousness which shines as I alone is the source of full and real happiness. Is self-enquiry performed by the mind? So long as mind is focusing on external objects, it has the name mind. But as soon as self-attention is begun, its name are lost. So we can no longer say that self-enquiry is performed by the mind. I am or feeling of I. The feeling of I am is the experience common to one and all. In this I is existence, Sat, and I am is consciousness, Chit, or knowledge. This knowledge is not of any external, it is the knowledge of oneself. Mixed consciousness or ego. When self, instead of shining only as the pure consciousness, I am shines mixed with an adjunct as I am a man, I am an woman, I am so and so, I am this or that, then this mixed consciousness is the ego. The mixed consciousness can rise only by catching hold of a name and form. The first thought. When we feel I am a man, I am sitting, I am lying, we have wrongly identified the body for I, and that we have assumed its name and posture as I am this and I am thus, etc. The feeling this and thus, which has now risen mixed with the pure consciousness I am, is what is called thought, and this is the first thought. The feeling I am a man, I am so and so is only a thought, but the consciousness I am is not a thought. It is the very nature of our being. The mixed consciousness I am this or that is a thought that rises from our being. It is only after the rising of these thoughts that all other thoughts rise into existence. Self versus thought. Self, that is pure consciousness I am, is not an thought. This consciousness is our nature. I am a man is not our pure consciousness, it is only our thought. Common misunderstanding in self-enquiry practice. Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi has advised that self-enquiry can be done either in the form who am I or whence am I. Many aspirants have confusion regarding the practice of self-enquiry. Someone who tried to follow the first one, who am I, simply begin either vocally or mentally repeat who am I, as if it were a mantra japa. This is completely wrong. Doing japa of who am I in this manner is not correct way of self-enquiry as suggested by Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharshi. Bhagavan himself has repeatedly said, who am I is not meant for repetition. Some others think that they are following the second form, whence am I, and try to concentrate on the right side of the chest where they imagine something as spiritual heart and expecting a replay such as I am from here. This is also wrong. The concept of ego, soul, absolute and God. The term Atman and Aham both means I. Atma Vichara means an attention seeking. Who is this I? The consciousness I is the first person feeling. It is to be understood that the consciousness mixed with adjuncts as I am this or I am that is the ego, Ahangara, or the individual soul, Jiva, where the unalloyed consciousness devoid of adjuncts as shining alone, I or I am that I am is self, Atman, the absolute Brahman or God, Ishvara. Since all people generally take the ego feeling like I am the body to be I, the ego is also given the self, Atman, and it is called individual self, Jivatma. The ego, the feeling of I generally taken by people to be the first person consciousness, is not the real first person consciousness. Self alone is the real first person consciousness. The ego feeling, which is merely a shadow of it, is a false first person consciousness. When one inquires into this ego, it disappears because it is really non-existent. The question, whence am I, means for where does the ego rise? A place of rising can only be for the ego, but for the self, since it has no rising or settling, there can be no particular place or time. Therefore, inquiry whence am I is inquiring whence is the ego. Only to the rising of ego, which is conditioned by time and place, will question whence am I be applicable. Finding a place in the body as a rising point of ego in reply to the question whence is not the objective of Sri Bhagavan's teaching, nor is a result of self-enquiry. The result which is aimed and seek when the rising place of the ego is the total destruction of that ego and not an experience of a place in the body. Thus, attention to oneself in the form whence am I is inquire into the ego, the rising I, inquire it will vanish. Who am I method. While inquiring who am I, we have to take feeling I to be our being, that is our existence and not rising. This is attention to self. Two methods. The difference between the two forms of self-enquiry is that the difference between the rising and our being. In either of these two kinds of enquiry, the attention of the aspirant is focused only on himself. The ultimate result of both enquiries, whence am I and who am I, is the same. He who seeks whence am I is following the ego, and he who seeks who am I drowns effortlessly in his real natural being self. Therefore, whether done in the form whence am I or who am I, what is absolutely essential is the self-attention should be pursued till the very end. If we cling to the feeling of I uninterruptedly till the very end, such attention to the feeling I is called self-attention. What is important to be sure of during practice is that our attention is truly turned only towards I. Thank you.